If there's a naughty word in economics and finance these days, it is derivatives. On March 4th, 2003, the BBC News reported that no less than Warren Buffett had, in his annual letter to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders, said, quote, "Derivatives are financial weapons of mass destruction." This was not the only time that Buffett had cautioned financial market participants about derivative securities. In his 2006 letter to shareholders, Buffett described the process of unwinding a portfolio of derivative securities that Berkshire Hathaway had obtained when it acquired the insurance company General Re. Buffett wrote, quote, "Long ago Mark Twain said, 'A man who tries to carry a cat home by its tail will learn a lesson that can be learned in no other way.'" If Twain were around now, Buffett continued, he might try winding up a derivatives business. After a few days, he would opt for the cats. And of course, anyone who was paying attention during the financial market crisis that began in 2008 remembers that the derivative securities made up of subprime mortgages were routinely described as toxic assets. A lecture on derivatives belongs in this course for a number of reasons. All of us should understand that, in principle at least, derivative securities are important tools that allow a wide range of decision makers to lower, I said lower, the risk of their business operations. Most derivative securities and most trades in those securities improve social welfare and are in no sense evil. Many of us own derivatives whether we realize it or not. After the 2008 financial meltdown, tremendous pressure was placed on Congress, Treasury, and the Federal Reserve to enhance regulation of derivatives and derivatives trading. It's important to understand derivatives in order to appreciate the difference between regulatory changes that will improve our welfare and regulatory changes that would be harmful. Overall, derivatives are wonderful examples of human ingenuity and inventiveness. And I will begin this lecture by defining derivatives and providing three simple examples of derivatives that provide unquestioned value to society. Next, I provide an overview of the various types of derivative securities that are bought and sold routinely in financial markets. And then finally, I'll zero in on collateralized debt obligations, explain what they are and how they contributed to the financial crisis of 2008. So, what exactly is a derivative? A derivative security is an agreement between two parties, the value of which depends on an underlying price or transaction. An underlying price or transaction. But what does this mean? A derivative security always involves some other underlying product or some other underlying transaction. For example, a commodity futures contract is an agreement to buy a well-defined quantity and quality of a commodity at a specified future date. The underlying product for the commodity futures contract is the commodity itself. And I'll frequently use this example. Number 2, soft red winter wheat. Many derivatives involve delayed delivery of the underlying product, and indeed that turns out to be important with the wheat market. While popular accounts of derivatives and derivative markets often focus on speculative activity, made a killing, it is important to understand that derivatives provide important opportunities for business people to lower risk associated with their regular business activities, and I shall provide examples. There are scores of types of derivatives and hundreds of different derivative contracts traded regularly on financial markets. Complete treatment of derivatives is beyond the scope of this course, and in fact, it could require an entire course of its own. But it is useful for all of us to understand the major types of derivatives and derivative contracts. The first that I'll cover are options. Options to buy or sell shares of stock. Call options are the right to buy. For example, a person might buy the right to purchase a specified number of shares of a specified stock, like General Motors, at a specified price until a date in the future when the option would expire. Okay? Underlying product, of course, shares of GM. Now, a put option is parallel, but it involves the right to sell. So a put option would be the right to sell a specified number of shares of General Motors, say, at a specified price for a specified period of time. Futures contracts on a wide variety of underlying commodities and financial products are also important derivative securities. Future contracts tend to be traded on exchanges. Okay? So that wheat contract, Chicago Board of Trade. In addition to future contracts, there's an important, similar but different kind of contract called a forward contract. And forward contracts are especially used in trading foreign currencies. Futures contracts typically specify an expiry date, a calendar date and time at which the contract expires. Forward contracts are a bit different. They tend to be written every business day, and they specify fixed spans of time. So the right to buy or sell British pounds for 90 days would be the stuff of a forward contract. And as we'll see, the price of a future contract would be for delivery on a future date like May 20th, 2011. Forward contracts are traded over the counter, which means that a computer-based trading system accepts orders and looks to match buyers and sellers, and those folks never meet face-to-face, as is customarily the case with over-the-counter markets. Here's another example, or another type of derivative. Swaps. Now, hold on a second, that's not what you're thinking. Swaps are contracts where two parties agree to exchange payment streams. But what the heck does that mean? Well, I'll explain. Suppose that borrower A has entered into a debt agreement with interest payments that are flexible so that they're adjusted every year to market conditions. That borrower's interest rate could go up, could go down, or whatever. Borrower A could enter into a swap agreement with borrower B. How would that work? Well, the agreement would call for borrower B to make borrower A's flexible interest rate payments. So B makes the payments that change through time. And what does A do? Borrower A would make fixed interest rate payments at a rate that would be negotiated as part of the swap agreement. So you can see how that might be very advantageous for somebody to be able to transfer the risk of changing interest rates to another party, presumably in exchange for a fee. One important type of derivative is termed a structured product. A structured product combines assets into new financial products that provide risk and return features that would not be otherwise available in the marketplace, or perhaps not available at accepted very, very high transactions costs. And I'm going to explain what that means in just a moment. We're going to look at a couple of examples of structured products because you and I have both encountered them before, not only in our course, but in our lives. And because they provide an easy and highly intuitive way to understand why some derivative securities provide investors with very valuable opportunities. Let me return to one of my favorite examples. One structured product is a share in a mutual fund. The mutual fund company, as you'll recall, agrees to create a portfolio of stocks and other financial assets that best meet a set of objectives. Financial investors, especially those with small amounts to invest, hundreds of dollars, not thousands, frequently prefer holding shares of the mutual fund to creating their own portfolios. There are mutual funds with the stated objective of matching the risk and return features of stock indexes, such as the New York Stock Exchange, the Standard & Poor's 500, the Russell 4000, and so forth. So, a mutual fund is a structured product that provides diversification at very, very low transactions costs. It would be impossible for a small investor with hundreds of dollars to construct a portfolio from individual stock purchases that would provide the same diversification of risk as provided by, say, a mutual fund designed to mimic the S&P 500. Here's another example of a structured product that we've encountered before and that plays a big role in day-to-day financial life. Maybe not of us, but of many, many individuals. Treasury strips. Treasury strips are structured products that I have discussed in a previous lecture, but let me remind you what they are with an example. Suppose the U.S. Treasury issues a $20,000 20-year bond with a 5% coupon rate. Reasonable example. So what does that bond promise? It promises 41 different payments. 40 payments of $500 each that will be made every 6 months between the day of issuance and the day of maturity, and one payment of $20,000 on the maturity date. Enter a clever financial firm. That clever firm could cut that single 20-year bond into 41 different zero coupon bonds. But that would not be a winning strategy. Instead, that clever firm will buy many government bonds and offer a menu of zero coupon bonds tailored to the needs of that clever firm's customers. Since many customers prefer to hold zero coupon bonds, the firm that creates them will be able to sell the zero coupon bonds it creates for more than it pays for the treasury bonds that are the underlying product. This is just good baking. Any baker hopes to sell the cake for more than the baker paid for the flour, the chocolate. You get the picture. Merrill Lynch began offering a precursor of Treasury strips called TIGRS, T-I-G-R-S, standing for Treasury Investment Growth Receipts, in 1982. Seeing how popular those were, in 1985, the U.S. Treasury itself introduced its own coupon stripping program called, originally, STRIPS, Separated Trading of Registered Interest and Principal of Securities. Okay. Commodity price futures are derivative contracts that can be used to hedge risk. So I want to focus on this claim I've made that we can use futures contracts to hedge risk. Now, that's kind of surprising. When I first encountered commodity futures, it was from the 1903 novel by Frank Norris called The Pit, referring to the trading pit. It describes wheat speculation in the trading pits of the Chicago Board of Trade. The novel focuses on the speculative opportunities afforded by futures markets and contributes to the unsavory reputation of derivatives and derivative markets. As a story, it was kind of like the Wall Street of its day. All right, what exactly is a commodity futures contract, and how am I going to explain how it can be used to reduce risk? Well, a commodity futures contract is an agreement to supply a fixed quantity of a well-defined quality of a commodity at a well-defined place and a specific future time. Wow, that's a mouthful. We need an example. Let's consider a Chicago Board of Trade wheat contract. Frank Norris would want us to. Let's say 5,000 bushels. The wheat must be number 2, soft red winter wheat, although the contract specifies other deliverable grades. The wheat must be delivered to a warehouse approved by the Chicago Board of Trade in the Chicago Switching District or the Toledo, Ohio Switching District. So we're talking about a railroad warehouse. Each contract specifies an expiration date. Contracts are available that specify expiration dates in July, September, December, March, and May of each year. A typical posting of wheat futures data in the Wall Street Journal looks like the diagram you're seeing now. The quotes are for December 10, 2010, and the prices are in cents per bushel. The last quotes before the screenshot specified $7.45 a bushel for December wheat, $7.83 for March wheat, that's the dead of winter, $8.10 for May wheat, and so forth. You can read it down the graph. Okay. How can a wheat farmer use the wheat futures market to lower risk? So I'm identifying the farmer as the person who can lower risk by clever trading in commodity markets. Well, let's look at the situation of the wheat farmer. A wheat farmer must spend money to plant a crop of wheat months before the farmer will know what the wheat is worth in the spot market. That means that the farmer does not know when he or she commits funds for field preparation, seed, fertilizer, and so on, whether the revenues from the expected crop will be bigger than the costs of producing that crop. That's real risk. The farmer can hedge risk by selling wheat contracts in the futures market. He's going to sell wheat that the farmer hasn't grown yet. Suppose the farmer were making decisions about a crop in December of 2010. That farmer would know that he or she could sell wheat in the futures market for $8.24 for next September delivery. What's the hedging strategy? The hedging strategy would be to sell the number of wheat contracts just equivalent to the expected crop size in units of 500 bushels. The hedge works because if the price of wheat in the spot market falls, the value of the futures contract rises and offsets the loss associated with supplying wheat at the spot price. No free lunch here. Of course, if the spot price rises, the value of the futures contract falls. But that fall is offset by the gain associated with selling wheat at the higher spot price. Now, you're probably curious about this. The farmer will never let the future contract expire and deliver the wheat. The hedge works fine if the farmer takes an offsetting position in the futures market just prior to the expiration date and zeroes him or herself out of future positions. Great! I can lock my price in before I have to commit to bearing the cost of the crop. Who am I selling this future wheat to? Well, a couple of very cool examples. One, a large user of wheat, such as a commercial bakery, for example, may decide that it is a good idea to lock in the price of wheat by buying futures contracts before that bakery publishes a menu of prices for its baked goods. Wow. So a futures market is a place where future users of wheat and future producers of wheat can shake hands in an advantageous way. But there's a whole other group of folks that farmer might trade with, and they're called speculators. And before you expect that the farmer's about to get himself fleeced, let's think a little carefully about what the speculator does. Speculators may believe that they have a better estimate of future spot wheat prices than the prices predicted by future contracts. They're selfish. They would like profits. And in an attempt to make those profits, speculators buy wheat futures when they think the eventual spot price will be higher than the futures contract price. And they will sell wheat futures when they think the eventual spot price will be lower than the futures contract price. In effect, the existence of a futures market in wheat allows farmers to transfer the risk associated with the variation and uncertainty in wheat prices to another party, one that is more willing to bear the risk. In equilibrium, speculators will earn a profit, an expected profit, just high enough to compensate them for the risk they bear. If the profit's too high, other speculators will enter. If the profit's too low, speculators will leave. In equilibrium, the farmer's expectation of future wheat prices will be different than the futures price, with the difference being the source of profit for the speculator. Let's go back to our example. Our farmer may believe that the price of wheat next September will be $8.40. But that farmer might prefer to lock in a price of $8.24 per bushel before committing to the crop, rather than assuming the risk that the price might be lower, say $8, or maybe so low that the sale value of the wheat would not cover the cost of planting and raising the crop. Okay, most of us aren't farmers. Most of us would not be trading commodities. But hold on a second, here is another example, an example that you can read about repeatedly in the financial press that you can well understand. Airlines bear great risks by committing to flight fees, the price of transport, before they know what their costs are. And one of the great costs faced by airlines that can change a lot is the price of jet fuel. Guess what? There is a commodity market in jet fuel. An airline can hedge the risks associated with the possibility that jet fuel prices will rise after fares are published by buying jet fuel futures. And indeed, Southwest Airlines is famous for doing so. Okay, that's been the good stuff, all of the examples of derivatives which clearly enhance social welfare. But you want to know about another one, I know. Because of their importance in the financial market crisis that began in 2008, I will explain now collateralized debt obligations in some detail. Okay. A collateralized debt obligation, or a CDO, collateralized debt obligation, is a structured product. The CDOs that were the focus of attention during the financial market crisis of 2008 were mortgage-backed securities. And indeed, some of the mortgages were claims against borrowers who had substandard credit ratings. And that's why the crisis came to be called the subprime mortgage crisis. So the subprime modifies mortgage, not crisis. Because the mortgages played a central role in the financial market crisis, the crisis itself came to be called the subprime mortgage crisis. Now, before you get all in an uproar, I'm going to point out that under certain assumptions, collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, are much less risky than the underlying mortgages. Let's consider an example. It's a very simple example. Suppose we have two $1,000 IOUs, okay? Two $1,000 IOUs. And suppose, for simplicity, that only two payment outcomes are possible. Full payment, no default, and complete default, zero payment. So each of those two IOUs will either pay in full or not pay anything. And let's, for the sake of specificity and simplicity, assume that the probability of full payment is 90% for each of the IOUs. Let's further assume, and this is very, very important, that whether one of the IOUs pays is unrelated to the prospects for the other IOU. This is to say that payments of the two IOUs are independent, statistically speaking. All right, I'm going to make a CDO. From the underlying IOUs, construct two new securities. I'm going to call one the senior security. It's the safe one. The senior security pays $1,000 except when both of the underlying IOUs default. So it pays off unless they both default. It pays off if either one of them defaults. But it fails to pay off if both underlying securities default. Now, the probability of default of either security was 0.1. The independence assumption means that the probability that the senior security will default is 0.1 times 0.1, or only 1%. Okay? Now there's a junior security. That security pays zero if either IOU defaults. I don't care if it's IOU A or IOU B. If either A or B defaults, or if they both default, the junior security pays nothing. Now, the default probability of the junior security is 19%, given my assumption that defaults are independent. How did I get that? Well, hold on a second. The probability that A will pay is 0.9, that B will pay is 0.9, that they both pay is 0.81. 1 minus 0.81 is 19%. Every other outcome has junior defaulting. What have we done? Are we amusing ourselves? Oh, no, no, no. Two IOUs, each with a probability of 10%. From them, we've made one IOU that's super safe, only a default probability of 1%. And a second security, far more risky, probability of default of 0.19. Well, it may be that the market would rather have a 0.01 and a 0.19 than two 0.10s. And therein lies the prospect that CDOs are valuable to society. Now, actual mortgage-backed securities are more complicated, but they work in essentially the same way as the example. How are they different? Well, the initial pool has many mortgages rather than two. There are more than two groups. It's not just junior and senior. There are several groups, and they're called tranches, for the French word for slice. The securitization process is sometimes repeated by pooling and slicing the CDOs to create a second-order derivative called a CDO squared. And sometimes a form of insurance called a credit default swap is bundled together with the lower slices or the lower tranches of the CDOs to lower their risk. Now, we're going to look at mortgage-backed securities again when we talk about the financial market regulation, and yet again when we talk about the financial market crisis of 2008, and of course when we talk about the Great Recession. But today, we have taken a quick Cook's tour of the derivative securities and markets. Perhaps the most important thing we have learned is that derivatives play a very important role in allowing business decision makers to reduce risk. Our farmer reduces risk by selling a crop in the futures market. An airline executive reduces risk by buying jet fuel in a different future market. An exporter who is at the point of selling machine tools to a Japanese buyer can reduce risk by selling yen forward. Or if the sale is specified in dollars, the Japanese buyer can reduce risk through a forward market. And financial firms that issue mortgages can more easily raise funds to finance that portfolio of mortgages by using them as the underlying product for a collateralized debt obligation. As we go forward, we will use our understanding of derivatives to help us better understand the challenges faced by both regulators of financial firms and the policy arm of the Federal Reserve. Thank you very much.